Most of you know Evan, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of, I'm not really going to go into an introduction. I will tell you that Evan is a long-term friend of Tekserve, and we are very excited to have him back after our last successful event with him talking about Final Cut. So everyone, without further ado, please give it up for Evan Schechtman.
Okay. So I know that everyone, I have a bias, right? But today we're going to attempt before NAB to look at a whole host of technologies that actually influence editing. So today we're here to talk about the state of the NLE, the nonlinear editor, and things that influence modern workflow and that make you go, Why are we here? We're here because change is a constant. Is that up behind me? Okay, good. We're here because change is a constant. We were here about in August of last year to talk about Final Cut 10. And what it was and what it wasn't. So today we will be talking about it, but we're going to look at the state of all the NLEs. We're here because of disruptive technology, right? So it's the very catalyst that helped me start my business to a certain extent, and it was a major change agent. So one of the original disruptive technologies was DV. Okay. And DV was a price performance changer, right? What you see is what you get. It was like the laser printer for the publishing industry that this really redefined. Remember the VX1000? There you go. And Firewire, this was a big disruptive technology. Red was a disruptive technology. It forced all the camera manufacturers and editing systems to almost redefine their terms. It brought 4K to the masses, and it also redefined price performance for digital cinema and had a massive effect on a lot of the work that we do. Solid state technologies had a transformative effect on the work that we do. It really, obviously, this is the core of tapeless workflow, and it is why certain editing systems de-emphasize tape ingest. Solid state has a wild effect on performance of machines, cameras. And of course, this disruptive technology, disruptive is a nice way of saying it, it's amazing. They poured in all this new technology, and everyone's been crying for innovation. And then they released Final Cut 10, like, whoa, not that much innovation, right? A little bit at a time. So we're at a crossroads. A lot of people are at a crossroads. A lot of people have just kind of frozen and haven't decided to move from Final Cut 7 to one of the other systems. And for many people, that D-Day is NAB. NAB is the National Association of Broadcasters. It's a big dork fest where we all wear name badges. I hide mine because it would be working against me. And this is where all the manufacturers roll out and show their wares, and a lot of people will be interested to see, or not see Apple, and then see a bunch of the other companies who kind of smell the blood in the water and have been working really hard since Final Cut 10's release to come up with something that's a value proposition and try to convert the people who are at the end of life of Final Cut Pro 7. I guess people know who I am, but I figured, because this always goes out on the internet, and I've had such lovely comments about my last YouTube video, I thought I would actually introduce myself formally. But I do want to take a minute to talk, because I know this is being streamed live, and then it goes on YouTube. So I do want to take a moment to address Steve from the internet, who had lovely comments about all the things, not you, Steve, generic Steve from the internet. If Steve from the internet would just tear himself away from his snack-encrusted keyboard in his mom's basement and actually try these new technologies and actually put it to use to develop your own opinion, and instead of glomming on to the opinion or the knee-jerk reactions, that's not for Final Cut. That goes for all technology. So haters, start your engines. I actually have an opinion. So I'm Evan Schechtman. It's no doubt that I'm a Mac user. I'm a computer person. I like Windows. I like Linux. I drink Pepsi. I'm young. I'm fun. I like to wear fancy shirts, but I wear them like a slob. And as of yesterday, in the Ugly Meter Pro for iPhone, I scored a 71, which is actually not that bad. Higher numbers are better. I work for a company called Radical Media, and I'm their chief of technology. Radical Media makes a lot of stuff. And the reason why I'm even showing this is so that you understand where I'm coming from. So this was actually a pretty difficult presentation to put together because I actually have an opinion, I have a workflow that works for our company, and although we're testing the waters of new platforms to see where we're going to go, I think it's really important that you understand the work that I do, because as much as I'm shooting from that perspective today, I'm trying to take a more holistic view of the whole situation. We make wonderful TV shows like Iconoclast and documentary films on lots of famous people for MTV and stuff for the OWN network, as long as it's in business. Make amazing documentaries with famous filmmakers like Joe Berlinger. We did this wonderful documentary in the 25th anniversary of Graceland that was at Sundance. Visionaries, documentaries on cool technology like Watson. Crowdsourced projects. Has anyone ever heard of the Johnny Cash Project? Cool, all right, so out of the box kind of thinking, breaking the mold. I know people from Radical have heard of it. One of our directors did the Wilderness Downtown, websites for NASA, the 25th anniversary of Sting's solo career app. We call it an appumentary. Apps for the Gagosian Gallery, one campaign. Crowdsourced pro bono projects, promotional events and influencer campaigns for Nike. And of course, our directors are responsible for hundreds of commercials that you all fast forward through each day. The workflow at Outpost, which is the post-production facility owned by Radical Media, has a pretty defined workflow. Right now, it's a combination of Final Cut Pro 7 and Final Cut Pro 10 as the mainstay. We're actually using Final Cut 10 now on 2 or 3 real projects with clients. For me, it's a pretty robust, fast storytelling tool that really is a 1.0, a brilliant 1.0, a peek at kind of where we're going. That's, again, my opinion. Some people will agree. Many people will disagree. For color correction, we actually choose to use DaVinci Resolve. And so you can take XML from Final Cut Pro and move directly into DaVinci. It's a pretty, and that is really in its infancy as well from Final Cut Pro 10. But everyone is feverishly working to make this a reality. We use Pro Tools for audio, and although there are many good audio systems to choose from, for the most part we choose Pro Tools because it is an industry standard, and as importantly, that means that there is a deep tranche of professionals that we can choose from, even though we have our own staff folks, to operate Pro Tools. So I'm going to swallow my own tongue. We'll be all right. We also have begun to use Smoke. And we'll talk a bit about Smoke as compared to the other editing systems. This is a really impressive platform. Knowing it feels like you know an actual secret language. And it is really, in my opinion, the only super app. And we'll talk specifically about the pros and cons of Smoke. And of course, all the ancillary things that we need to use to support our workflow. Tools to convert RED, tools to convert XDCAM, and of course, most of the Adobe suite. Bridge, Photoshop, After Effects, of course, Illustrator. Let's talk about dead systems just for a second, right?
How do I say goodbye?
Radius Edit DV. Steve, do you remember Radius Edit DV? This was literally killed directly by Final Cut Pro. The Stratosphere, Speed Razor, Edit from Discrete Logic, which really was a cool product back in the day. I know that BlackBerry is not an editing system, but it's pretty much dead, so I thought I'd add it to the list. Fast 601. I always used to see like these weird kind of outlier nonlinear editing systems at NAB, and I was like, has anyone in this room ever used Fast 601? Who the hell used this? You did? Well, Matt, of course. Sony Xpri. Our friends at Sony make amazing hardware. They've almost never made a nice piece of software. Microsoft Movie Maker's not dead, but it's always been dead to me, so I left it on the list. Strata Video Studio, which was pretty cool. Abacus. Cytex Turbo Cube. Montage. The Video Toaster. Amiga. And of course, Final Cut 7. It's on the list, although it's still supported. We're all here because these products came before and have all been end-of-lifed, and we're really left. Here's a few that are missing. I'm one slide back. And missing in action is Media 100, which, believe it or not, is still made. It's like the foreign exchange student of the nonlinear editing world. And Chiron. And although Chiron's still in business, does anyone use a Chiron for titling? at least not in this group. And I know we're talking to a lot of editing people. So let's see if I can do this. I haven't practiced this. So there are a lot of manufacturers that have come and gone over the last decade. There's been an ebb and a flow of who has kind of ruled the roost at individual times. And so here you have all the obvious players, right? You have Media 100, Pinnacle, Sony, TrueVision, Aldis. Does anyone even remember Aldis? Puffin, Meta Creations. And these companies over time, here's what's interesting. TrueVision used to make video cards called the Targa card for Premiere and for Edit. And they quietly made the cards for the original Avid systems, the ABVB systems. And in many ways, we've come full circle in that there are other companies that now make cards that suit every nonlinear editing interface. A lot of these companies, Aurora, but over time, these companies, for whatever reason, by acquisition or from lack of innovation, have completely disappeared, right? So I'm waiting for them to disappear to get to the next part. Sorry, I have this full-time job thing which gets in the way of making presentations. JVC, and I love Craig, who's here from JVC, but they've always just been doing their own thing. Amazing cameras, amazing projectors, but they're JVC. They're doing their own thing. And then big companies like Blackmagic have seemingly come out of nowhere and risen to a certain amount of dominance. They keep acquiring all these other companies as they file for bankruptcy, and so they're slowly eating up all these other companies that are out there. Adobe, of course, is rising to a certain amount of dominance, and we're very curious to see what they have to offer at NAB. They have the most to gain, in my opinion. Avid's already been there. Avid got bigger and smaller. It's not based on their amount of cash. AJA, right? They make a lot of amazing video stuff. And so a lot of companies have come and gone. And again, someone needs to stop Blackmagic Design from acquiring companies. It's actually getting a little out of hand. As a matter of fact, this is a press release. Tekserve is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Blackmagic Design while we were standing here. Got to be careful of these guys. I, for one, welcome our Blackmagic overlords. There are other editing systems that have taken like a sharp right-hand turn, like Lightworks. Lightworks was one of the mainstay systems for film editors. It took a lot of Thelma Schumacher, who's most famous for working with Martin Scorsese, loves Lightworks, and Lightworks has become an open source nonlinear editing system. We complain about the products that are completely polished that we receive. I don't think anyone really wants to write a driver to extend a piece of software. But amazing things can be done with open source software. And of course, cloud-based editing. For as good as that is with bandwidth, there's WeVideo, and there's a few other companies. So there are some outliers out there when it comes to NLEs. There's a major hardware architectural shift that has happened that has an effect on your computer purchase, your planning of computer purchase, and no matter what NLE you choose, this architectural shift has a huge impact on you. This is a GPU. This is a graphics processing unit. You need to start thinking of your computers as two computers. You have your CPUs, right, your multi-core CPUs, and those are your central processing units, and you have your GPUs. They're really made for graphics processing. But in a lot of what we do, the GPU sits idle. And this has to be thought of a multi-core. It's a multi-core chip from ATI, from NVIDIA. And these chips are so good at very specific math that they're becoming more and more important in the NLE ecosystem, mostly because of this, OpenCL. OpenCL, or the Open Computing Language, says that companies can, this really first started happening with NVIDIA, and Apple has embraced OpenCL. A lot of companies have embraced OpenCL. OpenCL says that for certain operations that would normally go right to your CPU for rendering, video compression, and things that we would consider visual math, that no longer happens. Anything that's OpenCL enabled talks directly to the GPU. So in really intensive tasks like rendering, video compression, output, OpenCL takes over, and your video card in many ways is more important than the speed of the actual CPU. As you move forward, you definitely want to pick machines that have the biggest graphics processing unit. It used to be that you bought the best video card with the most amount of video RAM on it if you were a gamer or you were doing 3D modeling and rendering. And in post-production, only very specific things leveraged OpenCL and the GPU. The GPU is more important than ever. They make iMacs with upgraded video cards with up to 2 gigs of VRAM. On the tower, you have a choice of GPU. When you make your next computer purchase, the video card should be almost more important to you than core clock speed if you are in the content creation business. I cannot stress this enough. So where you thought, oh, I don't need 2 gigs of VRAM, you do, because going forward, the operating system leverages OpenCL, and every nonlinear editing platform leverages OpenCL. Because OpenCL, in many ways, we used to say long ago that I wish they just put out some card for Final Cut Pro that just accelerated the whole thing. I'll pay any amount of money. I just want the card to be able to accelerate import, export, rendering, whatever it is. And it never came. Well, they're here now. They're your graphics cards. They're in laptops, they're in iMacs, they're in everything. The GPU. So here's one from NVIDIA and one from ATI. They have strange names like Radeon and Diablo, and I don't know who thinks of this. Back in the day, I did own one of these. This is called a Blue Ice card. It had 8 tri-media chips and 72 gigs of RAM. That was a lot. This was a $7,000 card that when you bought a certain plugin for After Effects or Media Cleaner, it accelerated it. You'd come in the morning, there'd be a bomb on your screen, and then when you restarted, you'd get the job done very quickly. What's funny about doing a speech like this is I try to look for the best images, because no one wants to watch a fat guy in a window talk. So I try to find things to divert your attention. And so this was a dead product, and I found it in the clearance section of B&H's website. But when I was Googling Blue Ice After Effects, I mostly found stuff like this. So it took me like an hour to find an image, so damn it, we were going to stare at it for a minute. The other architectural shift is that all of our processors are 64-bit. If you're a Mac user, absolutely. And in Windows, most of the modern stuff you buy is 64-bit. I'm not going to use the typical analogy, yes I am, that it's like lanes of a highway. And 64-bit have more lanes because the Apple logo is like a little US 1 kind of thing. 64-bit means more lanes of data traveling in parallel. It means better use of RAM. For instance, I used to love clients that would roll in. How's it going? How do I look from here? Any bats in the cave?
Nope.
All right. Just making sure I'm on the web. It was funny, when I had clients that would buy massive Macs with max RAM, when RAM was really expensive to run Final Cut Pro. Final Cut Pro 7 is 32-bit. It only accessed 4 gigs of RAM no matter how much you had. So there was diminishing returns for people who maxed out their systems. These days, apps that are 64-bit on 64-bit hardware benefit from an immense speed boost. So the GPU coupled with fast RAM and 64-bit software with 64-bit processors is the performance that we've always been promised. But 64-bit software is RAM hungry, so you need to download more RAM from the interwebs. This is what RAM looks like. You can't download it. I'm sure some hater on YouTube can't download RAM. Such a fat kid. So you go and you grab more RAM. My advice is if you're a media person, even just running one media-intensive app, like a Final Cut or a Premiere, or in some cases Avid, minimum 16 gigs of RAM. Minimum. And that's the max you can get into the current 27-inch iMac. Buy max RAM. You can get that right here in the store. So we're here today to talk about 3.5 mainstream NLEs. And I always will put them in alphabetical order, even though I have a personal preference. But even, I don't let that personal preference cloud the fact that there's a lot of good choices out there. Premiere, we're talking about 5.5, even though I'm very, very curious to see what 6.0 has to bring. Final Cut 10, it's not Final Cut X, it's Final Cut 10. And of course, Media Composer 6. What I want to focus on first today is what is the same about all of these platforms, and not just dive into what is completely different about them. We'll talk about the pros and cons of both, because we're here to talk about all of them. And again, I will definitely inject my personal opinion. So again, in alphabetical order, Premiere, Final Cut 10, and Avid. Well, they're all 64-bit. So 64-bit hardware, lots of RAM, great GPU, you're good to go. They're all multi-core aware. So the more cores you have in your processor, the better your performance is actually going to be. But what I just said, what did I just say? I feel like my own dad. What did I just say? Did I just tell you the GPU is the most important thing? You're not listening. If you only knew this like you knew your schoolwork. This is my work. The GPU is more important than ever in all three. I just channeled my own dad. It's amazing. That's what happens when you have a kid. When you start paying the bills in this house, you can touch that thermostat. The GPU is the... I'll turn this thing around right now, I swear to God. The GPU has become central to your performance as visual artists. All three of these apps are completely GPU aware. The more you throw at it, the better it's going to do. You can mix codecs, right? So you can mix, now you can mix your H.264, your ProRes, your DNx HD, whatever codecs you're working in, you can mix them all in the timeline. Actual results may vary, not valid in Tennessee. Open timeline. The reason why I left the Avid circle kind of hollow, you can do this, but in Media Composer 6, they have something called AMA, Avid Media Access. This is the 1.0 version of it. This is their system, but you can plug in plugins that let you access all these kind of third-party codecs that are not native to the Avid system. And as great as that is, and this is not me bashing it, we're here to give a holistic look at the situation, even on an equally configured Mac. I did this test. Here's a 15-inch laptop. Here's Final Cut Pro 10 running H.264 from a Canon 5D Mark II. And we did that on Final Cut 10, and that thing just plays like it's nobody's business. It's quite impressive. And funny enough, your CPU does nothing. I wish there was a way to look at what your GPU is doing, but your CPU does nothing. Took Media Composer 6, same system, quit Final Cut 10, opened up Avid, dropped in the same clip, and I could not play it smoothly. So AMA, although it will let you access this media, there are a few caveats in there, but it's the beginning. And I'm the first person to say if it's a 1.0, wonderful idea, it's got a ways to go with its performance, and I'm sure they will get there.
So does it still try to do everything in its own codec?
If you actually use the import commands without AMA, it will transcode everything to its DNx HD to resolution you specify. You can go through AMA and be able to get H.264 and non-optimized codecs into the timeline. It's not really where Avid necessarily excels. It is an amazing cutter. There was this article put out, these 7 editors weighed in on Final Cut 10. And the interesting thing was, one of them talked about he just finished a job on like a 5 or 6-year-old Avid, which to many of us is totally antiquated, antediluvian technology you can barely use. However, if you think about the edit system more like a Steenbeck or a Moviola or as an appliance that does one thing really well, you would find that that 5-year-old system, if you follow the Avid workflow, which is very robust and very proven and has a deep tranche of editors to choose from, it cuts. They had no problem getting the job done. Not to mention, this is more of a rigid system where a lot of people in traditional Avid editorial land still rely on other parts of the Avid ecosystem or third-party systems to finish. Symphony, DaVinci, what have you. Anyone been to a linear bay lately? I didn't think so. So, yes, you can mix codecs in all of them. Premiere, that's central to the spec sheet if you look at it. And we'll talk a bit more about that. Open timeline means I can mix frame sizes, I can mix frame rates. And that's also very important. Again, editor beware, because although that may be easy during the offline, when someone goes to online stuff that has mixed codecs and mixed frame rates and mixed frame sizes, it's a bit of a different story. Final Cut 10 handles mixed frame rates very beautifully, that you actually have control over what it is doing for the rate conform, and that's new. Because although Final Cut 7 did this, it was voodoo at what formula was being used to take 2398 to 30, or 25 to 2997, or whatever it is, and now you actually have rate conform control in Final Cut 10. RAW and RED, I ran out of screen space, so I had to jam these two together. They're two different things. RAW workflow means that if you're shooting on something like XD-Cam, RED, and a few other camera systems, there are import steps where we unwrap it from its proprietary little wrapper. I'm not going to wrap. I was about to. It's terrible. No, I'm not doing it. I have nothing to say. So in RAW, the idea here is that you leave those things wrapped up in their custom BPAV structure, and they have their XML and their MP. You just leave it all packed together, and you start editing right away. That's raw workflow. Red, of course, we all know Red, the big disruptive technology. Certain systems let you take the native Red stuff before it's debayered, which means going from huge and detailed to some other smaller workable form. Premiere, their big claim to fame with 5.5 is they've gone raw. And they also do Red natively inside. That's a very big deal on a spec sheet. Final Cut 10 is completely native workflow. Native meaning I can bring an XDCAM, I can bring an H.264, I can bring these things in after they've been unpacked, which is actually what we prefer, and we'll talk about raw workflow in a moment, but it just doesn't do Red natively inside of the timeline. There's an argument for and against that, and we're going to go over it. And of course, Avid does have the ability to work with these things, again, through AMA and some other workflow. But Premiere, the only one who claims on a spec sheet and in practice, you can go raw and work right inside. 4K resolution actually has become pretty important. In our facility, HD is the lowest resolution we acquire in. And 4K has become very important. I think at NAB, 4K is going to become even more important as Canon shows new wares beyond the C300, and a lot of other companies release more 4K stuff. I think that JVC's got some pretty killer 4K stuff coming out, and Sony will show the second or third iteration of their 4K stuff. 3D, I giggled a little bit when I put this together. Yes, there is stereoscopic workflow for Premiere. 40 feature films last year were done in 3D. 40. My child's 4th birthday may, in fact, be in 3D. There are plugins that will emerge that will let it work with Final Cut Pro 10. But if you really think about stereoscopic workflow, you start cutting with left eye, not the woman from that band. You start cutting with left eye, and then when you're done and your cut is locked, there are methodologies for basically marrying up right eye, changing naming conventions, and going to a system like a Smoke to do stereoscopic. Not knocking it. It must be fun to sit with it, 3D glasses on in front of an editing bay. So if staring at a screen for 10 hours isn't bad enough. And I will admit that at home I have a beautiful JVC dial-up projector, and I often fall asleep with 3D glasses on. Isn't that a nice picture? And of course, Avid has a very robust stereoscopic workflow. XML. We're going to talk specifically about XML in a minute, and all these programs have some semblance of importing or exporting XML. We're going to go dive into exactly what this means. Story search. This is something that I am actually jealous of as a person who's choosing to go right now down the Final Cut Pro path, which I see great benefit to. That there is no native ability to either use voice recognition in a way, right? Or phonic recognition, or take a script and tie it to time code and literally cut, copy, and paste the script and watch the edit change. Avid licensed some technology that lets them do this. The demos look better than actual practice, but it's still amazing. And of course, they have this inside of Premiere. You know, the approach that Apple's been taking with many parts of Final Cut Pro 10 to date is allow third parties to do it. And we'll talk about the pro and con of that as well. You know, it's weird. I never thought I'd see Asia become Switzerland. AJA, or Asia as a lot of people pronounce it, is hardware that runs on every NLE, including Smoke. Almost their full range of hardware works in all those systems. And we're big Asia fans, AJA fans, and we also run a lot of Blackmagic stuff as well. Although, as Grant Petty, the CEO of Blackmagic, no worries. But you know, worries, dude. The driver doesn't work year over year, but still making beautiful products, all of them. And of course, cross-platform. Both Avid and Premiere. Matt, was that I insult someone by saying that? You look very disapproving, like a dad. Cross-platform is also extremely important to a lot of people. For me personally, and I'll keep my opinion to myself, using Windows is like tying one hand behind your back and punching yourself in the face with the other. When it comes to support, when you're in an application like an Avid, or you're in your editing application, it doesn't matter where you're at. I like the Mac operating system, its built-in facilities for media management, the way that it handles search. I'm a Mac fan, what can I tell you? And so this is one thing I can say I probably will never do. is move to a PC as my primary computer. Windows absolutely has its place in programming universal remote controls and my radar detector. Let's talk about raw workflow for a second. This is a generational thing. Some people are like, Dave Chappelle did a thing called raw? Remember when he was really funny? And then he's making a comeback. All right, so let's talk about this raw workflow thing. This is really important. It's used as a major selling tool, specifically right now for Premiere. So their whole thing is that it saves time by not having to pre-transcode or convert stuff before you begin editing in Premiere. You just get going. I personally, and I'm very happy to be, I'm sure the internet will correct me with everything I've said this evening. They are firing away how wrong I am. But people, in this audience, it's a small enough audience to correct me here, but I don't know how many people that shoot 4K on Red or shoot immense stuff in these formats that need to be unpacked, that need to edit so unbelievably fast. I cannot wait a moment to see this and start cutting it. I'm sure there are situations where short turnaround jobs, this is going to save a lot of time. Upstream. Downstream, it's a very different story. In raw workflow, you need a much beefier system. You are asking the system to do an immense amount of work. Because these camera acquisition formats, since, in my opinion, DVC Pro HD, when we moved into long GOP formats, MPEG-based or MPEG derivative camera formats, that's, people who make cameras don't call up Apple and editing companies like, hey, we're using this new stuff, and it's really just, it's going to throw a wrench in your whole damn thing. It doesn't work that way. So you need a very hefty GPU and an overly powerful CPU to really make a raw workflow sing, and a lot of disk speed, as I look at the promise people. You need a lot of hardware to throw at raw workflow for long-form jobs. And so I'm not completely sold on the benefits of raw workflow. It takes a lot more time on the output, exponentially more time on the output. This is the red rocket card. Red rocket. I don't know, it just makes me want to say that. It's like a throwback to my Blue Ice card in a way that if you are working with red, and a lot of people do as their primary format, and you want that speed and you don't want to go buy a heftier machine, you plug in a red rocket card, it's about $4,000, and it enables full real-time workflow with the red codec in certain NLEs. But again, it's a specific GPU, if you will, that speaks just to the red stuff. The red stuff. So Final Cut 10 right now is, and I say right now, we're having a great time using it. The transition for us has very much begun. We're cutting 3 projects with multiple editors in our environment with clients. Steve. Now, and it's going pretty well. Let's not forget the fact that as much as it's called 10, it's a 1.0. And it's not even out of its first year as a 1.0 product. The one thing I'll say about this is that people really don't like to learn new stuff. And yeah, that's a generalization. But the funny thing that's happened here is that people are like, I don't want to learn that new program. But they're willing to switch platforms altogether and learn a whole new set of things. So I don't want to learn this, but I don't mind relearning how my workflow works in Premiere or Avid or something else. It's a very strange thing to witness. My relationship with Final Cut Pro 10 has been like this, a love affair in the middle of a riot. It's a family store, I'm sorry. Get off of that. Let's talk about Final Cut 10 in a nutshell for a second. The Pro. One of the pros to Final Cut 10 is native workflow. We throw a lot of weird stuff at Final Cut 10, and it literally does not miss a beat. Out of all the systems I've used, when it comes to native performance, even on machines that are slightly old, of course, Apple, who writes the software which sits on top of the operating system and make the hardware, their stuff better have an order of magnitude more performance than anybody else's. And it does. It absolutely does. I swear by it. So what I'm really talking about here with native workflow is Canon 5D Mark II, the occasional YouTube clip. We're mixing ProRes. We're ripping from Blu-ray. Pretty much most of what you want to throw at it, especially camera acquisition formats, No, really, just no problem.
Do you transfer everything to ProRes first?
We don't necessarily transfer everything ProRes first. I have a partner of ours, Fremantle, and they have a YouTube channel, and so they're doing a lot of work, and they're mostly XDCam EX. And I said to them, they're on a small, brand new XSAN. We will definitely talk about storage. Is anyone bored out of their mind yet? All right, good. I never know if this is just preaching to myself. So they're on XDCam EX, and they're on a nice fresh SAN. And I told them, look, if you start freezing and crashing, because this is a long GOP codec, and as jobs get real big and edits get real complex, you may be taxing, in fact, the CPU more than the GPU, and you may have issues. And if you do, the wonderful thing about Final Cut 10 is you literally click one button, and every time you idle up, it transcodes to ProRes in the background, takes care of the settings, takes care of media management. You can go to proxy, or you can just go to an optimized ProRes codec. So it'll do it in the background.
So it recognizes if there's a problem with a specific thing, it says, well,
Well, it recognizes to Final Cut 10, much like Avid. Avid's DNX HD, which is native, and Final Cut is ProRes. That's its native codec. It's optimized for the entire pipeline of Apple's products and a lot of other third-party products. That it notices that XDCam is not native to Final Cut, and so it'll let you do it. Big render bar over it, but it just plays. And if you're really experiencing trouble, click a button, transcodes in the background, and over the course of the day, you'll feel your project getting a bit faster and faster and faster, and eating up your hard drive a bit more as well as it goes and makes ProRes material. You don't really have to do much. It really does handle all of it for you. Metadata-centric workflow is the best way I can describe the approach being taken by Final Cut 10. Metadata is pervasive, and it is used in very creative ways, from how it handles multicam to actually how it handles audio routing and output. Metadata is, in my opinion, most creatively and best used, especially from solid-state systems, in Final Cut 10. In my opinion, it is the leader, and let's be real, metadata is the future of media. From point of acquisition to point of delivery and search, metadata drives everything that we do. It has super fast performance, even on slightly older machines, and it is the super low-cost alternative. And it may not be for everyone, but I implore everyone to download a 30-day trial and not, this is the important thing. Well, I little pooch two of them. Okay. A lot of people, especially in our facility, and we've got some really smart editors and actually some unbelievable assistants, in some cases as important, if not more important than the editor, especially in a transition. You actually have to learn this software. You know, the big benefit to Premiere has been like, oh, it looks like Final Cut. I could just dive right in, and we'll go over that in a second. But you actually have to learn this. There are parts of it that are intuitive, and there are parts of it that if you're treating these facilities, which have been rethought from the ground up and resemble the editing that you know, you will not have a good time. You will add to the pile of people who believes that it sucks. You actually have to take a moment to learn something and unlearn muscle memory. This is not okay for a lot of people. This is the biggest point we can get across today for Final Cut. You actually have to crack the help, well, there's no book anymore. You actually have to crack that help menu and mouse on down and read that stuff. It's very important. It's reliance right now on third-party tools. Now, I put this in the con category because most people are crying, I got to go buy a $10 utility to import 7 into 10. Yes, it's $299. By the way, Final Cut Pro is dongled, which most people don't know. The dongle is called the Mac. You must have a Mac to run it. It's $299. Spend the $10, and we'll talk about 7. Well, talk about it now. 7 to 10 is pretty amazing. Well, I'm all over the freaking map here. Can you tell I didn't rehearse this? So one group of people will say third-party tools, that's BS. And I say that it is more important to rely on motivated third parties who operate in a development cycle outside of Big Bad Apple to talk directly to the things that we need. In fact, 7 to 10 made by Intelligent Assistants, Philip Hodge's company, really smart, really good people who make stuff that works. They're on like their 4th or 5th revision of this piece of software. In fact, I called them and said, it's not working. I sent them my project file. That night, they said, we solved your problem. We're putting an update in the Mac App Store. You're not going to call Apple Care and be like, yo, I'm having a problem with Final Cut. We're going to get right on that for you. We got people working in shifts. So the point here is that third parties, in many cases, are there to very specifically solve problems on their own terms, on their own time, and the Mac App Store lets stuff flow freely and directly to the operating system. So I say third party in specific cases, much better than waiting for a big company to hear enough critical mass of people cry about something, and I mean that in a constructive way, to actually make it feature. I salute third parties, and it also supports a third-party ecosystem of developers, and that's a good thing. So 7 to X, it does work. It works really, really well. I'm going to show it. But I don't advise using it thinking that I could just open up 7 project in 10 and just go. Because there are so many new facilities in Final Cut Pro 10 that 7 to 10, although it will open the project and it will resemble your project and it will play down with an amazing amount of accuracy, it is misusing the facilities of Final Cut Pro 10 to a point where it does make it look bad. I mean, not work bad, look bad. And it's not really leveraging the benefits. And that's why Apple didn't do it. They leave it to a third party to do it. Because if Apple did it, we'd yell at them for why it sucks. And if they don't do it, we yell at them for why it's not there. You leave a third party to do it. That's $10. X to 7 to go the other direction is $50. I don't know if that was politically done on purpose or what, but even if you still add those, you're not even close to the price that Final Cut used to be. And then, of course, X to Pro, which we've been beta testing. And that's how we go to Pro Tools and using all this new roles metadata. It is a 1.0, and it is incomplete. And I don't mean incomplete as an insult. I mean incomplete because it's a 1.0, and it's not even the 12-month mark of its release. Let's talk about Premiere. Premiere I'm highly intrigued by. I was a big user of Premiere going all the way back to the beginning where it almost looked like a storyboard. And no matter what you were doing, you were making kung fu movies because you couldn't keep synced for more than like 2 minutes. You killed my father. Prepare to die. It's my kung fu impression. It's a truly raw workflow. You can drop in red right into the timeline and start working. You don't even need to unwrap certain formats to get in there and start working. To a lot of people, that's a really sexy thing to try, but we talked about the need for CPU and GPU. It's a resource hog when we do it this way. It is an easier transition in many ways from Final Cut 7 than even Final Cut 10 is. Seemingly. It is track-based workflow, and it looks like Final Cut 7. It is a traditional viewer, source, record, editing paradigm that people are very comfortable with, that many people miss in Final Cut 10. Those who have tried it don't. I assure you they don't. You can import Final Cut Pro 7 XML natively. And when I mean natively, it's in its import menu. Doesn't mean it's necessarily doing a good job. Cons, many issues with core editing mechanics. People lament the loss of track targeting in Final Cut 10. It doesn't really exist in Premiere. And a lot of the ways you think it's going to work because it resembles Final Cut 7, it doesn't. There are some serious problems with the core editing mechanics of Premiere. I'm not knocking it. In our facility, Premiere will actually play a role now and in the future because of some of the things that it does on a spec sheet basis, letting us bring in DPX files and edit them and munge them together and do all kinds of utilitarian things with it. But I don't really see us in the 5.5 version, I don't see it as an alternative for us. It's a good performer, it's not a great performer. There's a lot of issues with monitoring depending on the hardware setup that you have. And this has been proven not just by me, by a lot of people. I tested all this stuff, and I wouldn't really call it scientific. I was in my underwear at home. There's a picture for you that you can't unsee ever. But there are issues with monitoring in the system. And if you're working raw, prepare for like an 8x real-time or longer render out. So here's my point with raw workflow. I can get going so super fast, yay! And then at the point when the client really wants to see it and really has ants in their pants, you want an 8 times real-time render or longer to get this stuff out of the machine? I don't think so. So although we must have saved a bunch of time on the head of the job, not having to manage or make more media, there's a few people out there that are very vocal about raw workflow saves hard drives. Hard drives have never been cheaper than they are right now. Your time is worth more than hard drives, in my opinion. So long final renders, if you're really exercising that raw workflow. Decide when you're going to save your time. For me, I would rather think a bit, transcode stuff, manage some media myself if it comes to raw workflow or unwrapping files. And I would rather know that when I'm under the gun, I can get stuff out like that with no render. That's my personal opinion. I'm sure the interwebs will correct me. Media Composer 6. It is not the new kid on the block. There are a lot of pros to Avid these days. Now, a lot of those pros came from the disruption of the original Final Cut, selling software without hardware, having a lot of hardware to choose from. With that being said, it drops into Final Cut Pro hardware environments, save the SAN, very well. It works on Decklink hardware, Matrox hardware, Bluefish hardware, AJA hardware, pretty much the hardware you already own for video in and out. It works on all that stuff, and it works really, really well. That's a massive departure. You can still get their proprietary stuff, and there's a lot of benefits to it. But Avid as a platform is more costly, and it's an easy argument to make that you actually probably do get a lot more for your money. But it is a more rigid system, which we'll talk about. It's an ecosystem that scales. That's good and bad. Yes, you can get away with doing everything in Media Composer. But in my personal life, and I definitely know these people are out there, I don't see a lot of editors that I've worked with make Media Composer sing beyond the core editing mechanics. I see some color correction happening in it. I just don't see people hitting it like they did in Final Cut 7, using every part of the entire suite. But it's an ecosystem that scales from control surfaces to Symphony to its own centralized storage system to playout to very robust ecosystem specialized for editing and content creation. There is a critical mass of editors that know Avid. And so that's really important from a facility mentality. Cons. You have to unlearn almost all of your Final Cut Pro 7 techniques. In Composer 5.5, they added a thing called a Smart Tool, which actually made the timeline work a bit more like Final Cut. Kind of modeless operation. Avid is a moded system. And so if you're going to make the transition to it, this is a more abrupt transition, in my opinion, than moving to Final Cut Pro 10. Not saying it's without its reward. It is a bit more rigid. AMA lets you bring in additional material that's non-optimized, but it is not loose with QuickTime and non-standard things that a lot of us like to do. It being a rigid system came from the transition that people made from tape-based editing to Avid editing. So there's a lot of paradigms that came from a traditional system that never changed. And for a lot of those people, they don't want it to change. It works really well. Smoke is a super app. Smoke is a highly divergent way of working. A lot of people who use After Effects in the Adobe ecosystem for visual effects work would find Smoke a bit foreign. The thing I love about Smoke that when you get inside of it, and you're changing rooms, so to speak. You know, years ago, when Apple had the whole suite of color and motion and live type, which I miss, I do, and all that, and soundtrack and all, we hope that each new release, I heard a rumor they're going to jam them all together. Well, Smoke in many ways is all of that in a very sophisticated way, jammed all together. And the amazing thing is that it has a nonlinear editing-centric interface that literally will import Final Cut 7 work, even as a keyboard layout for Final Cut. It's mostly used for polishing, finishing. Where am I? Tekserve. We're good. Early drug use, like 11 a.m. So the thing with Smoke in being a super app is that once the work is inside and you move from color grading to compositing to stereoscopic workflow, whatever it is, the program changes around your project. There is no round tripping. There is no more exporting between different programs. Once the work is in there, it molds right around your project. It's pretty amazing. It's sophisticated. And out of all of these products except for Avid, especially in the visual effects world, I don't see Adobe After Effects as amazing as it is. I don't see it as being the most client-friendly or client session-friendly tool for visual effects. Very complex compositions in After Effects can get bogged down in their organizational schema, and everyone's got their own way of working it. Again, I'm not pissing on it, because it works, and it's worked for a long time. Smoke is highly sophisticated. It is the only real, true 3D environment in an NLE without jumping up to Symphony or above in the Avid ecosystem. It interfaces with Maya, which is a very sophisticated 3D package, and really the rest of the Autodesk ecosystem, Flame, Inferno, and a slew of other unbelievably sophisticated tools that are an industry standard for super high-end visual effects. It is a highly scalable ecosystem. It's really the only super app for finishing that it all happens in one place. It's actually one of the first gesture-based interfaces using a pen.
That includes sound.
What's that? Oh, it was on my timeline. You're absolutely right. Editbox. Sold. I fell off my dinosaur and broke my newspaper. But thank you for bringing it up because it is true. But those systems, Autodesk, Henry, the Quantel stuff, they all came out around the same, started at the same time. Pen-based, gesture-based, random swipes made crazy things happen. Take a Final Cut, an After Effects, a Premiere person, and sit them in front of Smoke, and they're like, there's no menu bar. It's like knowing a secret code. You like knock on it where's import? It's got a unique file system and a workflow that is unique unto its whole ecosystem. There is a need for prerequisite knowledge when using this system. You're not going to just I'm going to just read the how-to and dive in. No. It's a resource hog. What I will say is to expect really important earth-moving things from Autodesk at NAB as it relates to Smoke. They do not live under a rock, and so we're really excited about, and I will be whoring myself out for them on some stage. I'll feel like I'm talking in a mall at NAB, but I will be talking about Smoke and its use in our environment. So I'm a big fan of Smoke. Read the effing manual before you purchase. The one thing I say to a lot of film students who come through for tours and to everyone in this room is that we all have an unprecedented level of access to software and information that didn't exist 10 years ago. You can get a free version or a trial version of almost all the products we talked about with an email address. In many cases, they're full-featured for 30 days. That's good, but if you're going to be reading spec sheets and listening to the marketing mumbo-jumbo of each company of what they really excel at, I would tell you, one, to download it and try it for yourself. Not enough people do that, and put it through its paces. But two, in many cases before I buy expensive electronics or software, I will skim through the manual. Because on a box, which they don't make anymore, remember when software came in boxes? And CDs came in boxes? Remember CDs? Unbelievable. The kids with their rock and roll and their pot. So when you read the manual, you actually can skim. It's Thursday night. It's the new Friday. Everyone lighten up. You're drinking, too. I'm not even drinking. When you read the manual, you will take a look at the features that each platform is claiming is like the big, huge selling point. There's always a caveat with almost all of them. And so by reading the manual, you will find out if there are any caveats to the feature that may be the thing that attracted you in the first place. How does Final Cut Pro 10 compare to 7 when it comes to audio? I would give it right now a 7 out of 10. In some places, I'd give it an 11 out of 10. The use of roles and metadata in audio is very sophisticated in Final Cut Pro 10, especially as it pertains to audio. And I can't get into it now because we'd be talking about it for an hour. They've taken shortcuts to getting a lot of stuff in there that we wanted. All the Logic plugins automatically show up inside the program, and they retain their own unique user interface. So I'd say that as a 1.0, it's fantastic. There's definitely some nuances that we hope to see in the future versions. But I don't think it would preclude you from getting work done.
You said Smoke is 3D?
Smoke is true 3D, not 2D 3D.
Not 2D.
Yeah, it's a real 3D camera. It'll work with, I forget the file format, but you can actually work with real 3D scenes in it. And because it's true 3D, when you actually make a light source, even if you have a video as a backplate and then you brought in an image that's an alpha, like a castle with a window that's cut out, and you move a point light through the space, it actually casts the proper shadow onto the background layer. A light passing behind something passes behind something. It's a true 3D environment. And because it's a true 3D environment, it is better suited to stereoscopic finishing, in my opinion, than all the other NLE-centric systems that are made for onlining. For us, Smoke is playing a very important role in the future of what we're doing. The current version even is. So I use Smoke on Mac, which to a lot of people who use Smoke on Linux systems or used to do it on IRIX systems, it would appear that it's missing a whole bunch of core things on the Mac, because it's less expensive than the Linux platform, that almost make it unusable. Now, I have two things to say to that. For a lot of people who've never used it before, they don't know what they're missing. And Autodesk is fully aware of that. Stay tuned at NAB. What's that? It's really meant, it is a finishing system for video that is very sensitive and capable in 3D.
Why is it that you're so excited about Smoke as opposed to Mystica, Quantel, Resolve?
Quan who?
Especially Mystica, who really everybody's telling everything else to take Mystica.
Well, say it again, I'm sorry?
Why do you not talk about Mystica when everybody else in the world is talking about Mystica and kind of dumping everything else?
Okay, everyone else in the world is talking about Mystica.
Hello?
I operate a facility that does pretty nice work. Maybe my head's in my ass, never heard of it. So for a lot of people who are doing visual effects as their core thing, who in this room has heard of Nuke? Oh, good, actually a good number of people. So people who are really focused on visual effects, what's that? Who has heard of Mystica?
I mean, in terms of 3D,
Look, I'm not challenging you. You're challenging me. So I'm asking you the question that in a nonlinear, the theme of today was the nonlinear editing ecosystem. And because Smoke has a nonlinear editing-centric interface as an organizational schema on the Mac, I included it. And for me, in a nonlinear editing environment, as the core thing, that core craft, there's a path to finishing. For 3D environments and for visual effects environments, there's a whole other ecosystem of tools that you have to choose from. For me and for a lot of people who come from Premiere and Final Cut and Avid, Quantel has never played a part in anything that we've been doing and really came from large facility, linear bay type of mentality. So tailoring it for the group today, Smoke has a place in the conversation, and I'm sure there's other wonderful visual effects softwares to choose from. Okay answer? All right. Get on the bus with the haters of Evan. It was a short bus. It's looking like a much larger bus.
Do you consider Smoke being a good rough cutting tool?
Although, you know, they'll even say this about Smoke on the Mac, that although you can cut in it, I don't know that anyone's sitting down and actually going to bang out a long form cut. If you're doing some simple stuff, sure. But a lot of people who come from a big editing project still want to have that as the basis of navigation and all the layering and everything else held together when they go and extend their visual effects work. And it does have a Final Cut Pro 7 keyboard shortcut to it, so that at least basic navigation around the timeline is somewhat familiar to you, although nothing else will be. X, M, L. Extremely important. XML, the extensible markup language, is not new to post-production. In fact, it really did come from the way that a lot of databases and systems on the internet spoke. And so XML became the great leveler, so to speak, to let everything talk to everything by putting out long streams of data that represent an edit, a composition. And we're going to talk about XML right now. Good XML out of a program, and Final Cut 10's got great XML out now with XML 1.1. And there are a lot of programs that use XML in order to parse it and convert it to other platforms. Good XML is like looting the store. In fact, there's enough of us here, I think we can take all the security at Tekserve. I'm itching. Just, let's do a smash and grab. No? Okay. Really good XML is about getting everything out of the store. They take it out a whole new door. XML is not a new idea. It's a relatively new idea to post. It actually came right in the middle of Final Cut. I remember talking to this guy, David Black, an amazing programmer. who I don't think is at Apple anymore, who's a big champion of XML and Final Cut, and it opened up a whole new realm of possibilities for people. There's a lot more data in XML than there is in an EDL, and this is the EDL argument. So every time I did a demo, Final Cut 10, I said, who the hell uses an EDL? And there's always one person that day that says, I do. Yesterday I used one. Who here used the EDL yesterday? The visual effects person, there you go. In the nonlinear editing world, unless you are delivering to an extremely old DaVinci, in my world, from my point of view, EDLs are dead and XML has taken over. An EDL as a traditional structure for output of a nonlinear editing timeline, I know that you disagree with me. I would love to have you spit venom at me right after we're done. The EDL argument in the modern nonlinear editing world is irrelevant. Shot, take, log note, comments, limitation to the file names that can exist in it, one effect. It is limited for the kind of work that we're doing and the interplay that we desire to go between editing interface, effects software, audio system, or whatever. XML is more useful and more dominant in the modern nonlinear editing world for traditional work, now I feel like I'm talking like a lawyer, than an EDL is. XML in our applications and pervasive metadata paves the way for digital asset management systems to all go web-based. Metadata is extremely important. Metadata that you bring in from solid-state recording devices, metadata that you impose or superimpose on your media. The flow of metadata, the intelligence of your actual media is extremely important as media now moves around between programs, and more importantly, in collaborative editing environments, as we amass years and years of assets. XML, which really is taking metadata and putting it out in a structured stream that other programs understand how to read and parse and use, is extremely important and is pervasive in the future of editing. This is what one of our current commercials looks like in Final Cut Pro 7. It's a Grey Goose commercial. It's a pretty sexy commercial, plays more like a music video. That's what it looks like inside of Final Cut Pro 7. Using an XML export from Final Cut 7 and going through 7 to 10 from Intelligent Assistance, this is what the same project looks like in Final Cut Pro 10. It resembles Final Cut Pro 7. The problem is, if you really were to cut the same spot in Final Cut Pro 10 and use its unique facilities for managing the timeline, primary storyline, secondary storyline, compound clips, auditions, all these new facilities, the timeline wouldn't look like this. Although it locked up perfectly, graphics came over, and as importantly, things that are exceptions that needed to be translated, where crossfade is now cross-dissolve, or other things that don't necessarily have a one-to-one translation, they show up in the timeline index as red markers, and you can click on them and jump to where the exceptions are in case you need to clean up the timeline. Pretty nice way for a degradation, so to speak, of translation. And it plays out beautifully. So again, this is what it looks like in Final Cut 7. This is what it looks like in Premiere. I did not have a good time importing this without, again, I have a personal preference. I've made it known, but I need to use everything. So I tried the same thing. Export XML out of Final Cut 7, went into Premiere 5.5, file, import XML. A lot of it came in. A lot of shots seemingly did not reconnect. And I tried to make the timelines look as similar as possible. I even changed the color of Premiere so that it would just marry it up a little bit to see that it's a very similar paradigm. And their exception list is not elegant. It's a text file that gets spit out of all the things that didn't translate well. Not that big of a deal, per se. So actual results may vary, not valid in Tennessee, of going XML, which is their big selling point. Go from Final Cut 7 right into Premiere. Yeah. This is what the same project, using the free automatic duct software, which has been end of life because West Plate has been assimilated into the Borg cube that is Adobe. That XML, through a very circuitous route, ended up in Media Composer 6. There it is. It actually looks perfect. I had a little bit of trouble, and I'm not very, very well versed in Avid, and it actually was somewhat intuitive, but I just didn't know that batch relink meant one at a time. Apparently, that's what batch means. Didn't know that. And then Smoke on Mac. It doesn't necessarily look professional. It doesn't have a menu bar. It looks chunky. It's badass, if you know it. And so I'm able to go between all these systems using XML. This is my argument against an EDL. That an EDL would not allow this kind of deep interchange between platforms. So it is amazing that with XML, you're not locked into any one system. Again, it's not perfect, and will continue to get better and better as there's a demand for it. You know, my other thing about XML and about workflow is that a lot of people were highly upset when Apple decided to change how Final Cut worked. There were workflows and individual pieces of the puzzle that people relied on and built their entire world around. There is this great system, and I'm sure someone here can remind me, that system where you can create an empty container file in Final Cut, and as you're digitizing, you could be cutting. There's a few of them. Pipeline. Someone else mumbled something at me. Picture Ready, thank you, there you go, Pipeline. Those systems are great, and so there are people who've kind of made their workflow around that one core thing. That's what's important to them. Or a plugin that lets it speak to their asset manager or an old legacy system. And so when other companies who don't care about you, they care about you, but not you, and they go and they change the rules, you're like, damn it, how'd you do that to me? Now I can't use your stuff. It's very much the argument with Final Cut 10. These days, yes, sir. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not even talking about Final Cut per se, but like Premiere, for instance, those things, like that one feature of using Pipeline doesn't work there either. There's a lot of people who are like caught in a rock and a hard place because they have to stay on 7 because it doesn't exist in 10 and it doesn't exist in Premiere, and they can't move to Avid from the same time factor. I can see from your face you believe I'm full of shit. The thing is that the point I was driving at here is that these days, programmers are prolific. It is a skill that a lot of artists even have. And so for you to hire a programmer or have one on staff, in the case of Radical having a gaggle of extremely smart people, if you are building a pyramid and your core business is this kind of storytelling, and you rely on all these tools, in many ways, you should own your own glue. You should have someone write that middleware that talks to the custom systems that you've developed with Perl scripting, XML, a conglomeration of all these things. It is not as foreign as it once was to hire a programmer to solve a custom problem for you. And the reason why that I say this is they're more accessible than ever. We have things like iOS to kind of thank for that, and the web to thank for that, is that it's not that expensive for you to own your own. And that way you are beholden to yourself as manufacturers decide to change the rules, change systems, end-of-life products. If this is really important to your workflow, you can own it. Not everyone's going to, but in a larger sense, you can. Digital asset management. This is the layer between you and your storage, predominantly in shared environments, whether it be live shared storage for editing or internet-based catalogs of materials that are important to large organizations. This becomes important because the death of Final Cut Server, which was Artbox, which was a very difficult product to use, but a very powerful product, that in many ways, even though it's been end of life, can still run for now, and is the heart of a lot of people's ingest and output workflow. It's gone. A lot of it lives in Final Cut 10. A lot of it doesn't live in Final Cut 10. There's CatDV, which is an old piece of software that's come a long way and has many different shades of how it can asset manage. And there's a new one called Contemo, which is usually talked about, Contemo and Vitaspine almost together. And this is a skinnable, web-based asset management system that in many ways picks up where Final Cut Server left off, is more customizable, is easier to approach, is a bit more expensive, and is a bit more extensible. You know, over dinner tonight, when Matt from Tekserve shoved a lot of meat in me around the corner, he was talking about a new product that has to do with asset management. He's like, the bread is the appliance, and the glasses on the table are the clients. He wasted a tremendous amount of food to help sell a new product to me. It was funny to me. This is what CatDV, one of the screens of what CatDV looks like. And it's your pretty typical asset manager about managing metadata and ingest workflows. It's got web-based views. It has server-based systems. It has standalone systems. Take a look at it. It's a pretty serious system, and it actually speaks to 7, and it speaks to 10, and it speaks to Premiere, and it can convert lists. It's a very useful tool to have in many different shades. So cat DVs become even more important. It used to be this tiny little thing. This is one of the screens from Contemo. Contemo will look very different depending on who you're buying it from. There are many resellers who buy the base Contemo, skin it, and extend it. I think at NAB we'll see a lot of little cottage industries pop up around Contemo and Vitaspine. And some interesting things about it is that there is a marketplace for people who write drivers for Contemo and Vitaspine to share stuff amongst themselves, to say, hey, has anyone written a driver to talk to a tape drive? Does anyone know how to talk to this system and that system? And so developers who are solving the problem for themselves now have an ecosystem and a marketplace to be able to sell that stuff. So I think it's going to be a very interesting NAB. And each time, I maybe go to NAB every 2 years now, because things don't move as fast as they used to, in my opinion. And after we were sold 3D and 4K and HD, we've slowed down a little bit. And I think that asset management or digital asset management will probably be a very, very big theme this year. Whew, okay. Storage and I/O. If you're falling asleep, I'm not offended. Drive systems and the pipes. Is it up there? No. USB, Firewire 400, Firewire 800, eSATA, LC multi-mode fiber, every flavor from 2 to 8 gigs. Ethernet in your 1 to 10 gig variety, and of course Thunderbolt being the newest interconnect from Intel and from Apple, also being used. You're holding one right there, and a beer. Oh. Thunderbolt beer. This is the Thunderbolt logo. It's fun. And this is the $50 cable. Cables are $50. There's something in there that's doing something. So there is some tech in that cable. Zach, good to see you, bro. There's stuff in there. These cables are expensive for a reason. Right now, we're seeing Thunderbolt in its copper variety. It will come out in some optical flavor later this year. This is in megabytes per second. USB 2, it's for like bottle warmers and USB sticks. Firewire 800, about 100 megs a second. USB 2, I think, theoretical throughput. USB 2, 60, Firewire 800, 100, gigabit Ethernet, about 125 megabytes per second throughput if your subsystem supports it. Express card, which used to be on the Macs, was a bit faster, but at about up to 300 and change megabytes per second, theoretical throughput. USB 3 is approaching the 600 megabyte per second throughput. There's a 6 gigabit variety of eSATA that I really haven't seen used many places that ekes out USB 3. 8 gig fiber. Gigabyte per second, pardon me. Thank you. Well, it's, although it is 6 gigabit, but it's pushing, in this case, 600 and almost 700 megabytes a second. I think it's divided by 8. 8 gig fiber, which is not installed in a ton of places. And of course, Thunderbolt, which beats out everybody at almost 1.2 gigabytes per second throughput, and it's dual channel. 2 channels at once, which is why I list it twice. It is fast. Essentially, Thunderbolt is PCI, the protocol that used to run on your video cards, over a cable. And this is, I hope, not the death of a pro machine from Apple, a tower. There are less benefits to a tower than ever before if you really think about it because of Thunderbolt. I don't need as many slots inside if Thunderbolt is going to take the place of cards I used to plug in. Essentially, these manufacturers have taken the card, sawed off part of it, put it in a box, boop. It's easier, not easier than that, but Thunderbolt port in the back and duplicating the functionality. Case in point, this is the promised SandLink, and this goes from Thunderbolt to 2 gig fiber. In my environment, we actually are using these. I've hooked up a MacBook Air a Mac Mini and an iMac directly to my SAN using this device, which is about $700 to $800. They have them right here in the store. Find your local Steve Grisati and shake one out of them. This is a pretty awesome device. And although I voided the warranty by opening it, I thought it was important to look inside and see what was inside. And essentially, very similar technology to the fiber cards I was buying in a box with Thunderbolt. That's a pretty big deal. So we used to have to use a card slot in a Mac to have fiber. And now we don't. We can use a Thunderbolt port. And Thunderbolt does daisy chain. Are you using it? Is that 4 gig fiber? Thank you. Thank you, Tekserve, for correcting me. Oh, the Promise guys are here. We think they're really sexy. It's the sexiest, most anticlimactic thing because you're like, oh my God, we can hook up an iMac to the SAN. And then you do, and you're like, great, now we're hooked up to the SAN. I'm not discounting it by any stretch of the imagination, but it adds a tremendous amount of value to a whole crop of machines that couldn't get on high-speed shared storage. It's a huge problem solver, it really is. We use a bunch of them. This is Blackmagic's little video box, the Intensity Extreme Pro A. Who knows what the fuck it's called now? I don't know. It changes intensity, ball of whatever. It's got Thunderbolt on it. Does a lot of the same stuff that the video cards that Blackmagic was putting out. Thunderbolt, HDMI, HDSDI, absolutely fantastic. It's not just them. Matrox, AJA, we're going to be seeing Thunderbolt everything at NAB this year. This is a really cool product. I don't know if Tekserve sells it, but lets you take certain laptops that have Thunderbolt, which looks exactly the same as DisplayPort, and they are not interchangeable, and that is a big pain in the butt. You put the laptop on its side, boom, dock it into this thing, hook it up to a big monitor, and you've pretty much got the equivalent of a desktop, especially if you've got a nice GPU and CPU. This really makes you want to buy the most powerful laptop you can get and use this dock as a home system. Of course, Western Digital shows their drives, which are very fast and relatively inexpensive. And all the usual suspects will have products for Thunderbolt. These are the Promise Pegasus arrays, which are unbelievably fast. In fact, when we demo Smoke on Mac, thank you, we usually show it on a 17-inch laptop with this kind of array. It's absolutely, it's crazy how fast these things are out of the box. And then Thunderbolt allows us to do things like this. Take this crazy rack from Sonnet that Tekserve also have, put two of them side by side, Thunderbolt to fiber, and boom, metadata controller and failover controller for XSAN. So we complain that Apple end of life their one rack U server, for which they sold only 30,000, which to them is nothing, the year that they actually end of lifed it. And we've been using this setup successfully in certain environments to manage XSANs. And so we're still one rack U. We're still cheaper than we were. We're missing some of the things we used to have, like lights out management in an XSAN controller, but a really beautiful system. And then they have this, which is coming out soon, which literally takes the Thunderbolt out the back and gives you a real PCI slot. Imagine a Mac Mini, which can get up to about $800, $900, maybe $1,000 with a solid-state drive. Very fast, has an i7, a very capable machine that gives you a bunch of new ports through Thunderbolt and a card slot to put in a fiber card if you don't want to use a SAN link. Thunderbolt is extending the life of machines which are seen as consumer. And so my argument for some people who say that Apple doesn't care, I don't see amateurs using Thunderbolt today as a solution to anything that they're doing. This is an interconnect that really is for professionals. The problem I have with Thunderbolt is that to me, it's not a professional connector. It's not a locking connector. It doesn't even use a magnet. And so at Radical, our solution for making it a professional connector is a tiny dab of hot glue. If we like to craft, maybe we bedazzle the back of an iMac, a little dab of glue, Thunderbolt cable, you're all good to go. Now, the problem here with a Thunderbolt is that if you went from computer to drive and then drive to monitor, and you disconnect the cable by accident, you're going to lose a hard drive, or you won't be able to see your work. So you can daisy chain crazy stuff with Thunderbolt, but I don't know what the solution is. I remember back in the day, who remembers ADB? A few of us. That was the old desktop bus, and then we used to have dongles. you have this whip coming off of your keyboard. We used to put shrink wrap around all of them and use a heat gun and make this bit. You can use the beat assistance with it, with these dongle chains, and then USB dongles. We got things hanging off the computer. A little hot glue, that'll do it. Thunderbolt, very cool, very cool. Drive systems, the chassis. We're not going to go too far into this. I've searched the web for a picture of a back of a Raid. Nothing. Most non sequitur type of material came up. So if we squint, here's the point. The front of the Raid, in most cases, looks the same. These little parking garages for 10, 12, 16 or more spinning disks. The back end of these RAIDs is what is really important when we're choosing a storage system for centralized or shared storage, or even some server applications. If you look at the back of this RAID from Isilon, in this particular case, highly, highly expensive stuff, not for a lot of us, but very robust, scalable stuff, just expensive. It's more of a PC box than it is a RAID. It's got a controller in there, it's running an operating system. In fact, in many cases, it's running on what looks like PC hardware. What comes out of the back of this RAID is what differentiates them. I don't know why I put the accent there. I'm international, what can I tell you? So you may have 5 RAIDs from a manufacturer that all look identical from the front, but from the back, some have multiple Ethernet ports out the back, speaking of a protocol called iSCSI, which is the old SCSI protocol over Ethernet. Some have fiber out the back. So the storage, it's like a reverse mullet. It's all the business up front and the parties in the back.